This week, we read a poem from a famed writer, Rudyard Kipling. Equality among the workmen and honor for all are the themes that wind through it. Then we'll take you from the meeting room where the Statue of Liberty was first mentioned as a casual idea, and follow it through its construction as it's built in the streets of Paris, bronze towering over the city, before being dismantled, loaded and delivered to the United States of America, and finally unveiled to the world. The face of liberty unmasked. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
Welcome back. This is episode number 441. Thanks for joining us again on this episode of the Whence Came You podcast. As always, first things first, I want to give a big thank you to all of our producers, our fellows, and our contributors to the podcast, bringing you this show every week. And as we've promised, we are not doing any kind of advertisements or anything. Just a simple thanks goes out to all of our folks keeping this program up and running throughout this pandemic. As you heard in the top of the program, we've got a few great pieces for you this week, and we want to go ahead and get started on those in just a moment. First things first, want to go ahead and mention that as we had some cancellations with speaking schedules, I do have a few talks coming up, and they're going to be virtual. So on the 21st of April, 2020, I'll be doing Esoterics 101. That's going to be a Zoom meeting. Information on that will be published to our Facebook page when we get it. Same thing with May 12th. I'll be doing Esoterics 101 again. And on May 21st, I'll be doing the Ark and Freemasonry, and then we'll see what's going on after that. The Ark and Freemasonry is kind of up in the air. We don't really know yet if travel and things of that nature will be possible. But if so, that'll be in Georgia. If not, it will maybe be online. We'll see how it goes. The first piece we have for the show is a poem by Rudyard Kipling. It's called Banquet Night. Now, for most of you listening to this, you likely know Rudyard Kipling was a Freemason, but maybe that you don't know he wrote some of the most interesting stories out there. Movies were made about them, and a wide gamut there is. He wrote The Jungle Book, so if you think about Disney's Jungle Book, Rudyard Kipling, with some creative license, of course, it's Disney, but how about The Man Who Would Be King, Rudyard Kipling? Probably one of the best reviews for The Man Who Would Be King is actually on the Midnight Freemasons website. Trying really hard not to give my bias toward Midnight Freemasons, but we had a really great review there for the movie done by a Mason who is a reviewer of films, so you should check that out. But this poem is called Banquet Night, and here we go. Once in so often, King Solomon said, watching his quarrymen drill the stone, "We will club our garlic and wine and bread, and banquet together beneath my throne. And all the brethren shall come to that mess, as fellow craftsmen, no more and no less. Send a swift shallop to Hiram of Tyre, felling and floating our beautiful trees. Say that the brethren and I desire. Talk with our brethren who use the seas. And we shall be happy to meet them at mess, as fellow craftsmen, no more and no less. Carry this message to Hiram Abiff, excellent master of forge and mine. I and the brethren would like it if he and the brethren will come to dine. Garments from Bozrah or mourning dress, as fellow craftsmen, no more, no less. God gave the hyssop and cedar their place, also the bramble, the fig, and the thorn. But that is no reason to black a man's face, because he is not what he hasn't been born. And, as touching the temple, I hold and profess, we are fellow craftsmen, no more, no less. So it was ordered, and so it was done, and the hewers of wood and the masons of mark, with Foxhall's hands in sit and run, and navy lords from the royal ark, came and sat down and were merry at mess, as fellow craftsmen, no more and no less. The quarries are hotter than Hiram's forge. No one is safe from the dog whip's reach. It's mostly snowing up Lebanon Gorge, and it's always blowing off Joppa Beach. But once, and so often the messenger brings Solomon's mandate, forget these things. Brother to beggar and fellow to kings, companion of princes, forget these things. Fellow craftsmen, forget these things. Banquet Night by Rudyard Kipling. Now, as we read through this, I thought it was really interesting to kind of get this flair for the idea that, we're always fellow crafts, we're never truly masters, of course, but the no more, no less had this somewhat feeling of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, nevermore. I'm sure if you didn't pick it up while I was reading it, I'm certain you felt it now, maybe a little bit. I love a good poem. I don't read enough of it, I'll admit this, but I do rather enjoy this particular poem, and it may be because it sounds a little bit like The Raven, and I love Edgar Allan Poe. The next piece I have for you this week is called The Statue of Liberty and Freemasonry. It's by Right Worshipful Robert C. Singer, Deputy Grand Master, F&AM, New York. Masons everywhere can take special pride in the part of a great fraternity played in the creation and erection nearly 100 years ago of the most unique symbol of freedom and opportunity, the Statue of Liberty. In the summer of 1865, a group of Frenchmen were gathered together one evening at the home of the well-known author Edward René Laboulaye in the village of Glavigny, a suburb of Paris. Among those present were Oscar and Edmond de Lafayette, grandsons of the Marquis de Lafayette, Masonic brother of George Washington, Henry Martin, and the noted historian and French Mason, and a young artist from Colmar and French, later German, Alsace, by the name of Frederick Auguste Bartholdi, who at the time was engaged in making a bust of Laboulaye, called, by one biographer, America's most ardent admirer in France. Laboulaye told the group that it would be a splendid gesture on the part of all liberty-loving Frenchmen to acknowledge their friendship to America by presenting a fitting memorial. Some have speculated that he had a second motive in mind, to call attention to the contrast between the American way of life with its freedoms and that of the French under the repressive Second Empire. The 31-year-old Bartholdi became imbued with the idea and also the challenge it presented to his artistic talent, but the proposal lay dormant during the autocratic rule of Napoleon III and throughout the destructive years of the Franco-Prussian War. In 1871, Laboulaye, the brother Lafayette, with their cousin, the Marquis de Noailles, and the Marquis de Rochambeau, along with Henry Martin, revived the plan for the as-yet unnamed memorial. They suggested that Bartholdi visit America and make arrangements for the presentation of the monument on July 4, 1876, the centenary of the Declaration of Independence. Armed with letters of introduction and full of high hopes, Bartholdi sailed for America, although it is said that he did not have even a rough drawing of the proposed monument. 2 weeks later, while standing on the deck of the ship Perrier steaming up lower New York Bay, he caught a vision of a magnificent goddess holding aloft a torch in one hand and welcoming all visitors to the land of freedom and opportunity. Quickly obtaining paper and brush, Bartholdi sketched in watercolor the idea of the Statue of Liberty, substantially as it appears today. It was his thought to have this symbolic structure tower over the steeple of Trinity Church, then the tallest building on the New York skyline. He wrote to Laboulaye, "These outlines may well aim beyond the mere monument at a work of great moral value." Bartholdi returned to France in 1874, and soon thereafter the Franco-American Union was established in Paris to raise funds for the Statue of Liberty enlightening the world. That same year, Bartholdi began his work at the Parisian firm of Gadget, Gauthier & Say. His model for the face of the Goddess of Liberty was his mother, Charlotte Bessaire Bartholdi. First, he made a 4-foot clay miniature, then a 9-foot cast and plaster, and then proportionately enlarged each section 4 times, making as many as 9,000 measurements with each increase in size. The main structural framework of 4 huge steel supports was specially designed by Gustave Eiffel, who later gained worldwide fame as the result of the 984-foot tower he created for the Paris Exposition in 1889. Under the leadership of Henry Martin, and inspired perhaps by the fact that so many of the sponsors of the Franco-American Union were members of the Masonic fraternity, a campaign netting 1 million francs was completed by 1880, Contributors included over 100,000 individuals, 181 villages, 10 chambers of commerce, and many school children. The pedestal, which was America's responsibility, had been plagued by inadequate financial support, and it took a last-minute effort by Joseph Pulitzer, the owner and editor of the New York World, to raise over $100,000, most of it from school children. Together, American and French citizens contributed some $500,000 to the project. Although the statue's completion was not in time for the original 1876 date, the right hand and torch were displayed at the Philadelphia World's Fair and later in New York, so America was given a sneak preview of what was to come. On Washington's birthday in 1877, Congress accepted the statue in the name of the United States as a gift from the French people. President Hayes then authorized General William T. Sherman, Army Chief of Staff, to select a suitable site for the gift. Sherman, knowing Bartholdi's preference for Bedloes, now Liberty's Island, wisely concurred. Meanwhile in France, Bartholdi and his 50 workmen finished the head, which was to go on display at the Paris Exposition Universelle in 1878. In 1880, the final stage was in preparation. The copper sheets were ready to be riveted in place, and Levi P. Morton, American minister to France, later Vice President of the United States and Governor of New York, was invited to drive the rivet in the first part to be mounted, the big toe of the left foot. The giant lady literally grew out of the Paris pavement. When completed, she stood 151 feet high and remained in place for 2 years, awaiting the building of a pedestal. The statue was finished on May 21, 1884, and formally presented to Ambassador Morton by Ferdinand de Lesseps, head of the Franco-American Union and builder of the Suez Canal, at a friendship dinner on July 4, 1884. Around this time, Bartholdi was a member of a lodge in Alsace, Lorraine in Paris, which was composed of intellectuals, writers, and government representatives. Invited his brothers to view his masterpiece prior to its leaving their native land for America. It is also reported that in November of that year, he delivered a lecture and gave the lodge a report on the history and various methods used in the creation of the statue. In 1887, after the statue was dedicated at its final resting place, Bartholdi told his lodge brothers of the ardent welcome he had received in New York and of the wide enthusiasm created by his work. Meanwhile, in America, plans were being made for the laying of the cornerstone of the pedestal. Chairman William M. Evarts of the American Committee contacted the Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of the state of New York and requested a Masonic ceremony appropriate to the occasion. It had been a tradition in America to have the cornerstone of a major public and private buildings and monuments consecrated with full Masonic rites ever since President George Washington, on September 18, 1793, had personally laid the cornerstone of the United States Capitol with the assistance of the Grand Lodge of Maryland. Similarly, the cornerstone of the Washington Monument was laid in a Masonic ceremony. The Evarts invitation, however, was more than a local manifestation of the influence of the craft or the continuance of a national practice. The presentation and erection of the Statue of Liberty was an occasion of worldwide significance, and delegating the laying of the cornerstone to the Masonic fraternity was a fitting tribute rendered to free men of high principles and recognized international reputations throughout the world. The date set for the ceremony was August 5, 1884. The American Committee sent invitations to all the leading state and municipal leaders across the nation. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 2 o'clock. Everything humanly possible was carefully planned, but one factor could not be controlled: the weather. On August 5, 1884, it did more than just rain. It poured. However, the ceremony went off as scheduled. The gaily decorated vessel, Bay Ridge, draped with the tricolor of France and the stars and stripes, ferried approximately 100 members of the Grand Lodge of New York and visiting Masonic Grand Officers, along with many civic officials, to Bedloes Island. Because of the limited space, the traditional Masonic parade was omitted and the program was begun immediately. A United States Army band played La Marseillaise, the French national anthem, following with every very popular Hail Columbia. Then began on the raised northeast corner of the pedestal the formal cornerstone laying ceremony. Brother Richard M. Hunt, principal architect of the pedestal, presented the working tools to the Worshipful Master William A. Brodie, Grand Master, who in turn distributed them to the Grand Lodge officers. Right Worshipful Frank R. Lawrence, Deputy Grand Master, Right Worshipful John W. Vrooman, Senior Grand Warden, and Right Worshipful James Ten Ake, Junior Grand Warden. Right Worshipful Edward M. L. Ehlers, Grand Secretary and a member of Continental Lodge number 287, read the list of items to be included in the copper box within the cornerstone: a copy of the United States Constitution, George Washington's farewell address, 20 bronze medals of presidents up through Chester A. Arthur, including Washington, Monroe, Jackson, Polk, Buchanan, Johnson, and Garfield, who were proven Freemasons. Copies of New York City newspapers, a portrait of Bartholdi, a copy of a poem on liberty by E.R. Johns, and a list on parchment of the Grand Lodge officers. By traditional ceremony, the cornerstone was then tested, and being found square, level, and plumb, the Deputy Grand Master completed the work by applying the mortar and by having the stone lowered firmly into place. The Grand Master then struck 3 blows with the gavel and declared the stone duly laid. The elements of construction, corn, wine, and oil, were next presented by Right Worshipful Brothers Lawrence, Vrooman, and Ten. The Most Worshipful Grand Master then gave a brief but pointed talk. He posed a question: why call upon the Masonic fraternity to lay the cornerstone of such a structure as is here to be erected? His answer, which is as true today as it was then, was: no institution has done more to promote liberty and to free men from the trammels and chains of ignorance and tyranny than has Freemasonry. The principal address was given by the Deputy Grand Master, Right Worshipful Brother Lawrence, who said in part, quote, "Massive as this statue is, its physical proportions sink into comparative obscurity when contrasted with the nobility of its concept. Liberty enlightening the world, how lofty the thought! To be free is the first and noblest aspiration of the human breast. And it is now a universally admitted truth that only in proportion as men become possessed of liberty do they become civilized, enlightened, and useful. As Masons, we cannot appropriate to ourselves alone the lessons which this monument will teach. Not only to us, but to all men will it appeal. The gigantic figure which is here to stand in unapproachable grandeur while the centuries pass will command, be noble, and the nobleness that lies in other men sleeping but never dead will rise in majesty to meet thine own." The remainder of the story concerning the Statue of Liberty and Freemasons is almost anticlimactic. Upon completion, the pedestal stood 89 feet high from its foundation on Old Fort Wood, an abandoned 12-acre site on Bedloes Island, 2,950 yards southwest of Manhattan Island. Liberty was dismantled in Paris, every copper plate and beam coated and packed into 214 cases, and the whole shipment transported on a 70-car train to the coast. After a month at sea on the Isere, she arrived at Bedloes Island in June of 1885. It took 15 months to assemble the 225 tons of pure copper applied in 1/8 inch thickness, steel, and iron. But when she was in place, the result was as magnificent as the Creator's dream. Dedication Day, October 28, 1886, was declared a holiday in New York City. Charles P. Stone, Grand Marshal, led the 20,000 paraders, including many Masonic lodges, from 57th Street past President Grover Cleveland's reviewing stand at Madison Square Park, and on down to the Battery, where the groups were taken by steamer to Bedloes Island. Brother Henry C. Potter, Episcopal Bishop of New York, gave the invocation, and Comte Ferdinand de Lesseps presented the statue to Chairman Everts in the name of the French people. Both the statue and the pedestal were then formally presented to President Cleveland, who received the monument with eloquent thanks in the name of the United States. Brother Bartholdi then pulled a silken cord, releasing the tricolor veil from the head and face of the Statue of Liberty, enlightening the world. The main speaker was Chauncey M. Depew, United States Senator, Railroad President, one of the most famous orators in American history, and an active member of Cane Lodge 454, having been raised in 1885. The program was closed with benediction pronounced by Bishop Potter. The Statue of Liberty is not just a colossal 225-ton pile of metal reaching some 300 feet into the air at the entrance of New York Harbor, conspicuous by day and a guide to mariners by night. Magnificent in its conception, wonderful in design, and a masterpiece of engineering skill, this gigantic figure holding aloft a torch of freedom in one hand and clasping a book of the law inscribed with the date July 4th, 1776 in the other, casts its light far beyond the horizon. The light which illumines the Statue of Liberty is a guiding symbol to the path of freedom for men of all nations. Yes, Freemasons everywhere can well be proud of the key role played by the craft in the inception and erection of this great memorial, and each of us should renew his vows and obligations to spread further the light of freedom, truth, tolerance, and justice, which the Statue of Liberty so grandly symbolizes. On August 5th, 1984, the Grand Lodge of New York observed the centenary of the cornerstone laying in an appropriate ceremony at Liberty Island, which was attended by Masonic and governmental dignitaries. A bronze plaque commemorating the original event was dedicated and affixed to the pedestal. Right Worshipful Brother Singer resides at an address in Floral Park, New York. This article is partly based on two seminal works, one by Brother William C. Casseel, Jr., which appeared in the September 1983 issue of the Masonic Philolathist, and the other by J.E. Bebrins from the October 1983 Knight Templar magazine. Material for these articles, as well as additional information for this Short Talk Bulletin, was gathered from the files of the Robert R. Livingston Masonic Library of the Grand Lodge of New York in the spring 1984 issue of the Empire State Mason. Now, when we think about the ideas of liberty, equality, and all of these wonderful things that bring up the patriotic American flame that lives in all of us, and if you're not from America, if you're not in the United States, I would say that at least those ideas live on in the freedoms of all countries who enjoy and prosper by the idea of liberty. I would urge those folks to head over to MasonicLegacySociety.com and check out the free document that we offer, which is designed for anybody, even profane, to be able to practice the art of our mysteries. That's it for this week. I hope you all have a wonderful week ahead. You're staying happy, you're staying healthy, and you're staying safe. Remember, just a quick thanks one more time to all of our contributors, our fellows, and our producers. If you'd like to learn more about how to join the ranks of these wonderful folks who are helping out the program, head over to wcypodcast.com and click on Support the Show to learn more. Of course, there are links for all kinds of things there to help out, but check that out. And that's it. So we'll talk to you all next week. Until then, stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson. Take care.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.